Hello, well, thank you for joining this afternoon's panel session on corporate responsibility and reputation in the digital age. I'm joined by a panel uniquely placed to discuss the topic. To my far left here is Lawrence Stellings, VP for the UK and Middle East for Reputation Institute, who are a reputation data, insight and analytics platform. Brittany Golob, Editor-in-Chief of the UK's leading corporate communications magazine, Communicate. And Simon Pleston-Jones, founder of Woken Up, a social network with purpose, which will be due to launch in beta in the coming days, very excitingly. So thank you so much for joining us. I'm Jess Warner, Director and Partner at Lansons. Lansons is a reputation management consultancy specialising in corporate communications and public relations. And something we talk to a lot of our clients about is how to build their story and how to build their reputation in the context of global, pervasive lack of trust in governments and organisations. So we're seeing a rise in mass movements by journalists, charities, lobbyists, NGOs, and the general public, which are so powerful that they can take down the reputations of these organisations. And they're really enabled by the digital sphere and mobilised by the digital world. So how can you manage your reputation in this context? That's the challenge we're going to be talking about. And I'm just going to start by asking Lawrence, what does make a great reputation in today's world, do you think, in today's digital world?
So we collect at Reputation Institute data and analyse data on the reputations of thousands of companies around the world. And if you look at the really top performers, they probably have three things in common. The first is actually they focus on their core product and service. And actually I think when you talk reputation, we sometimes think about sustainability or corporate social responsibility or purpose, and all of those things do really matter. But absolutely central to your reputation is your app any good? Are people using your digital platform? If you've got a customer service channel, is that working? The actual nuts and bolts, it doesn't sound very glamorous. Those things have got to work to build a reputation. Once you've got that right, once you've passed go, you've collected your $200 and you keep going around, I think the next thing you have to work on is citizenship. Does your company, does your brand, do you do something? Is there a good cause that you support? Is there an environmental initiative you get behind in a big way? Ideally, of course, you want to tie that back to what you do as a company, but is there something that people can point to and go, yes, that's a responsible company? And I think getting your product right, getting your citizenship sort of actions right, add up to a sense of governance and purpose, that company X or brand Y, they stand for something. They're fair, they're ethical, they're open in what they do. And I think they're probably your key pillars. That's particularly with a sort of man, woman on the street view. If you're looking at a different audience, maybe your investors, they'll have obviously different focuses, but typically products and services, citizenship, some sense that you're a well-governed company.
Okay, thank you, Lawrence. So I'm taking from what you're saying then that to have a good reputation, you have to be responsible now. Do you think that's right, Brittany? And what does that mean for sin sectors like oil and gas or banks who have got shareholders' expectations to live up to?
Yeah, I think you absolutely have to have some element of responsibility built into your reputation, and kind of communication strategy. Like Lawrence said, it might not be entirely on the investor agenda yet, but I think it will be getting there. And I'm going to bring up a couple of examples that I think are just doing a great job, even though they're in kind of those sin sectors. Because despite being in extractives or airline or whatever it might be, there are ways that they're operating to mitigate the negative effects they might have on the environment or the world economy. A good example is KLM. Obviously, airlines contribute a huge amount of fossil fuels emissions each year, and KLM came out with a campaign that was encouraging people not to fly. It was called Fly Responsibly, and this was part of one of their anniversary events, and they had this massive public relations campaign. They produced a high-end video. It's all over their website, and it's saying, take trains, take electric vehicles, take buses. If you don't have to fly, don't fly, which is amazing for an airline to kind of come out and say, please don't fly. Another good example is Shell UK, their retail arm, which not an environmental focused campaign, but they worked with their retail workers on a health and safety program, and they asked each of the retail workers, who do you want to be safe and well for? And it was filmed, and it was really heartwarming because people were sitting up there saying, I want to go home safe for my daughter or my cousin who I live with and who I love. You know, it was talking about the kind of relationships that they might have that would inspire them to bring an element of health and safety into their work. And they've now since broadened that from the UK to the EMEA, to the wider EMEA group as well, which is really cool. But that all said, and all those nice, great stories, I think there's still a long way for extractives and airlines and the kind of more challenging sectors to go before they can be talked of in the same sentence as REI and Patagonia and Tom's and Unilever and whatnot. So.
Right, because I mean, operating in the digital world means that all of these companies are effectively, in a glass house and are under constant public scrutiny and attack. I mean, what would your advice, Simon, be for how digital channels can be used to these companies' advantage?
So we're at an interesting time. I think this is the year that the world really woke up to climate, and that companies have a really important part to play in tackling not only climate change, but a whole range of social and environmental issues that are perhaps nicely summarised by the 17 United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. And so now we can see very clearly that, to your point, yes, you have to have a product or a service that makes your business sustainable, but we have to balance profit with purpose. And so what people really want to understand is not just what letters are you signing up to commit to responsible business practices, but what are you tangibly doing? What is the action that you're taking and the impact that you're making on the social and environmental issues that matter to me, your customer, me, your employee that you want to retain, me, the talent that you want to hire tomorrow, and me, the public at large? At the moment, that information is quite hard to get hold of. I could look on your corporate website, but I need to go work out where do you put this information on sustainability or diversity, and it's different from everybody else. Or I could look on LinkedIn, but you're so busy telling me on LinkedIn what a brilliant bank you are, or law firm, or retailer, or whatever it is in your posts, that it takes me a while to scroll through before I get to a single post on sustainability or diversity. So we're looking to solve that problem when we launch in beta at the end of this week. Why? Well, we're looking to bring together all of the individuals and organisations and governments taking action on the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals into a single purpose-built platform, specifically for the corporate world as part of the solution to a lot of these challenges, to be able to show not only do we sign letters, but this is tangibly the action we're taking and the impact that we're making on the causes that matter to you. So we believe that what's been missing from this space is a clear communication channel where, on the one hand, the corporate world can clearly communicate this is what we're doing on sustainability, on diversity and inclusion, on a variety of corporate social responsibility issues. And in turn, for that channel to be a two-way conversation where the corporate world could be held to account, to say, well, great that you're doing that, but you could get better, and just to be constantly nudged to just improve as we go along.
Brilliant, exciting.
I think it is.
And so, Lawrence, beyond telling all of the clients you work with to sign up to Woken Up and take part,
Of course.
are there other principles that you'd advise organisations when they're planning their digital communication strategies? And then, second part to the question, what do you advise they do when everything goes wrong?
Let me break this down into a couple of parts. So sort of the first part, what are the principles? I think corporate communications is a complex world, partly because those of us who work within it have it in our interest to keep it looking complex as a world. But actually it breaks down, if you want to build a reputation, there are two broad things you can do. One is the things you do as a business, and the second are the way you talk about those things. And actually, they're the two big levers you can pull. So there are the things you do, the products you make, the CSR strategies you run, the social network platforms you use, but the actual things as a business that you're making, producing, selling, whatever it is you're doing. So that's one route you can change. The other thing you can change or change in conjunction is the way you talk about it. The platforms you talk about, the way you run your comms budget, the way you talk about yourself, they are your two big levers. Now, within those, there's 101 subparts you can change, but they're the two big parts in terms of planning. In terms of what happens when it all goes wrong, when there's a crisis, my first piece of advice, try to avoid the crisis. I think we often talk about crisis management as if it's just this wonderful thing. We've got a crisis working group, we've got a strategy, we're almost baiting the crisis to come because we've got a clever plan ready for when it happens and we know how to deal with our journalists. Don't let the crisis happen. Plan ahead to avoid that from happening. And every week there are examples in the news where you think that was avoidable. So if you go back to last week, you have Airbnb in the news who are finally committing now to we're going to verify that the properties on our platform actually exist. Because there was the Vice investigation that found out that people would go along and the property doesn't exist and it's part of a scam or an elaborate ruse. How about you design your platform so that the properties, you verify these properties exist? That is a crisis you could have designed out. There would have been a reason in the early days of Airbnb they didn't do that, because you wanted to get very quick growths, and of course verifying properties takes time, so you decided not to do that. But you get to a certain size and you think, well, let's design that out. Over the weekend, there's a controversy developing about Apple and the Apple Card and how they go about credit scoring men and women being differently. And there's examples coming out of the US now from journalists who's saying, well, hang on, why is my credit limit much larger than my wife's credit limit? We earn the same amount, we've got joint accounts, and somehow the algorithm has ended up being sexist. Now, algorithms are complicated things, but someone could have designed out that reputation risk. And if a crisis does hit, if you fail to design out the reputation risk, 3 really simple bits of advice. One is to say sorry. Don't apologize for inconvenience. Don't say mistakes were made. Don't blame it on an intern. Just straight up apologize. We made a mistake. Sorry, as Elton John says, is the hardest word, but it's incredibly powerful as humans when you actually hear someone say sorry. Secondly is to own the problem. If you have a business critical problem, it becomes your biggest priority that week. Get everybody involved into into solving the problem. And then the third thing is just to communicate. In a vacuum, misinformation spreads, inaccurate tweets spread. There are things on LinkedIn that spread. You've got to communicate over and over and over again. We're sorry, this is the plan, we've got to fix it, and this is how we're working to fix the problem. So that'd be my advice.
Thank you.
And so much of that is about integrity. It's about acknowledging that, yes, things go wrong. And what we love showing is when things go right and everything's fantastic. But actually, if we want to have a very deep relationship with our consumers, with our staff, then we have to be completely transparent. We have to be open. We have to acknowledge the failures that happen and, as you say, own it and take responsibility for it and bring people on the journey. That's the way that you build trust.
Absolutely. And I think your point on don't just put the crisis communications plan in place, but avoid the crisis is a really good one. I think it comes back to that point on you've got to behave right and then communicate right. And that's the sort of conversation we have a lot at Lansons is, communication strategy isn't a patch, actually. It's about your behaviour and then communicating that effectively. But on your point you mentioned about authenticity and transparency, I'd like to dig into that with you, Brittany. So do you think there is such a thing as being too transparent? Can you over-communicate information about your business practices?
No. I don't think so. I think in terms of transparency, if you're doing something well and you're doing something for, the good of your business or the good of society, then definitely share it, talk about it more, say more things. And there are so many examples of great companies that are doing really great things that they're talking about, but there's even more that are hidden. And I have a couple, because I love examples, of organizations that kind of have built into their reputations an element of responsibility, but not just because it's a good thing to do, but because it's smart for their business. A great example is Weston Cider, which is a UK craft cider company. And for years, they had been running basically a circular economy within their production facility in Devon, Sussex, somewhere in the south. I'm American, hello. And they just hadn't told anyone. They didn't realize that this was a story that journalists would want to know, that consumers would want to know, that would help differentiate them in what's becoming a really competitive market. So only in the last year have they started coming out with a sustainability story. And it's not something that they put in place to talk about sustainability. It's something that was already something they were doing. They just now realize they can talk about it. And Coca-Cola too. We all think of Coca-Cola and think of sugar bad, but what they're doing in terms of water conservation, and a really specific example is working with farmers in East Anglia to recycle water to improve the soil, prevent excess runoff and pollution, and just kind of be more responsible with their water usage is not only good for conserving water, but it means that the sugar beets that they actually use in producing their products are more sustainable and are more efficient. So those are some great examples of companies that should be saying more things and being more transparent. But for me, it always comes down to authenticity. So if you say a bunch of stuff and you don't actually have that authenticity to back it up, it's all just stuff. But if you say it genuinely and with a kind of sense of honesty behind it, then that's what's going to really make the difference in the long run.
That's really important. We're seeing the conversation change. We've been talking a lot and talking. And what's changed this year is people now demand action. They demand that your words be married with action, ultimately that action being intentionally driven towards impact. And they want to see companies being part of that impact journey. I was in Lisbon last week at the Web Summit conference and went to Coca-Cola's stand and talked to their colleague there about what they're doing on sustainability. And their stand was purely about what they're doing on tackling waste and how they're looking to evolve their product on sustainability. I think the danger with sustainability is we use the word story. There's a story of sustainability, whereas actually what's happening is the corporate world is responding to a change in consumer behavior driven by Generation Z, by the Greta generation, that people now want to buy from and work for and invest in companies with purpose. And what we're seeing is the corporate world responding to that change in behavior. And they now know that if they want to be a company that thrives in the 2020s, they have to be balancing profit with purpose. They can't just be shareholder primacy. That's why we ended up with the Business Roundtable letter in August, and that's why we're now seeing companies really push in their marketing. This is what we're doing on the sustainability side, or diversity and inclusion, or whatever it might be. And that bit has always been on the side, the CSR bit. And that's why when I've been talking to some of the world's leading organizations about coming onto our platform, I have to talk to the CSR team, and I have to talk to the sustainability team and the D&I team and the comms team. And then I discover they're not wonderfully joined up. And particularly there's a gap with the comms team between these other sectors. But it's getting better. But I think we have to acknowledge that we're at the start of a journey this decade, but we know where we want to be by the end of the decade, and that's these United Nations Sustainable Development Goals having been attained. And it's just about raising awareness of these goals and helping the corporate world be a part of this and be a part of the solution.
Do you think it's much more difficult for large corporates to change the direction of the juggernaut than it is for a lot of the businesses starting out and some of the ones we've seen on this stage today? Is it much harder? It's just
I think it can be. I mean, it's easy to set out your business with a sustainable point of view like Tom's, but I have a really good example that kind of speaks to your two-way dialogue point, which is Johnson & Johnson, kind of similar to Unilever, but out of the US. And they had a lot of moms who were talking about the leading baby shampoo, and they were saying, well, we want natural products in our shampoo. And there were moms on blogs and moms on the internet, and everyone was up in a rage about shampoo. And instead of saying, well, this is how we make our shampoo, deal with it, they redeveloped the entire product from the ground up at the cost of probably millions, and relaunched it with natural ingredients. So it was kind of taking that feedback to heart and changing the way that they did things, even though they're a massive business with a huge heritage. So it's really interesting. Can be done.
It's sustainability is big business, and it now has to be the core of any business. So whatever size you are, you're going to have to respond to this change in consumer demands. And yes, you could argue it's easier for Patagonia to do all the amazing stuff they do because they're the size they are compared to a Unilever huge supertanker, but Unilever have been on a journey for a long time. IKEA is another brand that's very focused on sustainability. Patagonia is definitely the flag waver in chief in this sector.
But I mean, I think the thing that's exciting about when you get big companies involved is the scale of the impact they have. That even if you take the supertanker and it only nudges 4 or 5 degrees, actually when it's as big as the Unilever supertanker, that has such a huge impact. And actually, what you're seeing now, lots of businesses, Unilever, a great example, talking about our brands within the big portfolio they have that have adopted a purpose, that now communicate on purpose, are seeing huge levels of growth, outperforming the others. So they're making more of their brands purpose-led brands. And then I think, if Unilever, big, hugely successful business, can demonstrate we're doing purpose, we're doing CSR, we're not just talking it, we're doing it and generating results, that's a really good sign for getting lots of other businesses around the world to sort of sign up seriously, not just talk, but actually take the action as well.
Definitely. So, Simon, you mentioned Patagonia. In terms of a company that you think's really nailed its digital communications and it is able to talk about its responsibility and the various initiatives that are in place, is Patagonia the one that you would single out?
I think certainly they're perhaps the most successful in really resonating with their audience. They take a stand on issues and are pretty fearless about doing so. So they won't sell their gilets to investment bankers or social networks. An ex-investment banker now launching a social network. So see how we go, Patagonia. They will receive a $10 million tax cut and give the entire lot to charity. So they're very, very consistent in what they're doing. They are taking the action that backs up the talk, and their digital strategy is just an integral part of that. So I would say they're perhaps the most successful, most on the front foot. But there are the IKEAs, the Unilevers, and others who are the supertankers, but who are just held in similar high regard. And you can see them bringing people on the journey with them as they respond to this change in consumer demand.
Thank you. Well, I think what's been really clear from the conversation we've had is that absolutely you have to bring people on the journey. You've got to communicate right, but you've got to behave right in the first place. I'd love to take a few questions if anyone's got any from the floor. Otherwise, I'll just fire some more at you for the next couple of minutes.
Thanks a lot. So you guys have been talking a lot about, let's call it this way, the established companies. What's your guys' opinion on the newcomers and the boomers? So say Allbirds or Away, with a very, very clear and precise, call this way, sustainable, natural, eco-friendly brands. So what's your opinion on those kind of brands? Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks.
So one of the biggest challenges those brands have is brand awareness. And that's specifically what we're looking to solve for smaller companies. There are so many solutions out there to the world's environmental and ecological challenges that you have no idea exist. And that's why we're creating a platform to bring together all tech for good into a single purpose-built platform. And all of those eco-friendly products into a single place so that you can finally have a go-to place to discover solutions, because we've got a lot of problems, but we haven't got an inherent, a natural place to go discover the solutions. So a lot of it with those small companies, and it's the same with small charities. 57% of charities in the UK have no digital presence at all, just because of the challenges of setting up a website. So it's all about how can we create a space where the small brand or the small charity can find a voice and find the resources that it needs, but also find finally a place to communicate the help that it's offering.
Brittany, I'd be interested in your take. Obviously, editor-in-chief of Communicate magazine, so you report on companies which you think have a fantastic communication strategy. What would make you take notice of a smaller company?
I think with smaller companies, I love the passion. I love that, the purpose that they have behind their brand is often built right into that brand strategy, which is brilliant. It's always interesting to see how they grow. So often companies will hit that small to mid-level point where they find it difficult to either grow with that purpose intact or to kind of, it's like either going with the purpose or staying small and you know what I'm trying to say. Yeah. So it's always interesting to see how it happens and if they can stay true to that as they expand and as their supply chains become more complex, because supply chain transparency is no easy thing on a large scale. So if you have a small business, small supply chain, know everyone, everything's local, it's all easy enough. But once you get into different countries, into different types of products, it becomes a lot more complex. So, yeah.
Okay.
a little bit more cynical.
And Lawrence, what's your take on it? I'm obviously a Reputation Institute have a huge amount of data on established businesses, but also those challenger brands trying to change the status quo.
And those challenger brands can have fantastic reputations amongst their target audiences. The challenge for often startups are quite niche, and for them, success is getting 100,000 customers, say, of a very particular group. We're talking about Unilever. We're looking at tens, hundreds of millions. So I think the challenge is getting that reach. One of the medium-term ways they can keep having an impact is actually to be acquired by one of the larger players. And someone like Unilever has a really long history of actually taking really interesting startups. They prove themselves, then bring them in-house, and that can be one route, not the only route, but one route where you keep on having that impact so that you become part of something already bigger.
Brilliant. Well, I think that is us just out of time. So thank you so much to the panel, and thank you very much for listening to us this afternoon.
Thank you, Jess.